Hello my friends, my name is Heidi and this, most confusingly, is going to be episode 1 of the Books and Cables podcast. So a little bit of explanation at the top. Originally I had started the channel and hoped to do a more vlog or journal-like format for the podcast or whatever you want to call this, but I found over time that finding a little bit of time every single day became a little bit challenging, particularly when I was working full-time or I just didn't feel like knitting that day or my hair just wasn't looking too good. So I've decided I'm gonna buckle down, I'm gonna have a set format, and hopefully that's gonna allow me to share a little bit more and a little bit more consistently projects that I'm working on. I have missed a few weeks with the vlogs too while I was thinking about all of this. So anywho, I know it's confusing. This is going to be episode 1 and I'm going to go back and rename the vlogs that I've already done. I'll label those numbers too, but they'll be like the vlog series and this will be the podcast, if that makes sense. And I'm hoping that for the vlogs, I'm going to focus more on special events that I go to instead of kind of showing you more mundane stuff, because I feel like it's not necessarily something that everyone wants to catch up on, and then I would have to intersperse knitting content with things like me just walking through the streets, and I feel like it's not always something that people want to watch. So anywho, I'll just leave it at that. That's my thought process, and hopefully this means I'll be a little bit more consistent in talking to you about my projects. So this is my craft room. You haven't seen this room before if you have watched my videos, because behind this camera is actually the biggest mess in the world. So I haven't actually cleaned up any of it, but I had hoped that I would be able to turn this into the space where I can put up my feet, because I do have a matching little chaise thing to put my feet up on and do some knitting, but because of the mess I can't really physically be in here, but I thought it would make a beautiful background for these videos. And if you haven't watched my videos before, I'll do a little bit of an introduction. So as I mentioned, my name is Heidi. I am, let's see, how old am I? I always forget this. I actually Googled this once and I'm very embarrassed to tell you about that, but I am either 23 years old. Yep, I'm 23 years old. I'm living in Ottawa, Canada. Actually, I'm actually on the Quebec side. So I'm in Hull or Gatineau, just across the river from Ottawa. It's literally a 10-minute drive to Ottawa though, so I always just say I'm from Ottawa since people know where that is a little bit more. For reference, my local yarn store in Ottawa is Wabi Sabi, so you would have seen that store a lot. I love that place and I love all the people who work in it. I've been knitting for about more than 10 years, I would say. I don't really remember a time where I didn't knit, because I have a hard time sitting still and doing nothing, but I also have a lot of time where I want to lie there and do nothing. So basically, I've taken up knitting so that I can make my Netflix time feel super productive. So I guess that's it for that. I did do a little bit of a very long chat about how I got into knitting and my whole personal story in the first episode of my vlogs. But to summarize, I basically I learned to knit out of a book, although both my grandmothers from both sides of my family were, one of them was a crocheter and the other one is a knitter, but I, for some reason, just, maybe it was because they weren't super patient, but I could not really figure out how to knit from them, or it just didn't really stick. I have a very strong memory of my mom's mom, who has sadly passed away now, teaching me how to crochet, and I remember doing a square back and forth and then not really knowing how to end it, as I just kept going back and forth. And then my dad's mom, once we had moved to Canada, I spent a lot of time with her when I was around 7 or 8, and I remember she did try to teach me, but I think it was just, she just wasn't patient enough, and I just didn't quite grasp what she was trying to tell me. So in the end, I did learn from a book. So you know those scholastic pamphlets where you would, like, I would be so excited, you could order like stationery kits or like notebooks with matching pens, and you can order like actual books, but nobody wanted those catalogs for the books. So I saw there was this kit for learning how to knit, and it was a book. It was very good illustrations. I can't remember what it's called anymore because this was sort of more than 10 years ago now. But and it also came with sort of large needles and yarn, bulky yarn. And so I learned how to knit from that, although for a really long time I didn't know why. I was very frustrated. I was like, this looks nothing like any of the pictures. And then I found out that there's a difference between a knit stitch and a purl stitch, and I'd just been doing the knit. So I didn't like the texture of the garter, but I was really mad that I couldn't get the beautiful stocking knit look that I saw in all the knitting stuff. And then eventually I figured it out. But I learned a lot of my knitting just from going on the internet, and I was not one of the early testers of Ravelry, but I was one of the earlier people who joined as soon as it opened to the public without the referral link. But I used to go on these like kind of sketchy websites where they had no pictures of what it was called like 5,000 free knitting patterns, and I would just pick it up and try it. Anyway, I don't want to spend most of the time talking about myself, even though I guess this podcast is going to be about myself, but I do want to talk a little bit more about my knitting. And I apologize, I am talking a little bit quickly, but I think I might be nervous. So that's making me like, ooh. Anyway. Now, I know you see what I'm wearing here. So I'm going to skip forward past my story. If you want to go back to the first episode of my vlog and hear me talk about it in great lengths, and I'm sure in not a lot of interesting detail, you can do that. I'll leave a link, but I'm going to get right into it and talk to you about the projects that I've been working on. Actually, I have 2 things that are finished. One of them is this, and I have another one in my basket, although I might have buried it at the bottom, so it's very helpful. And what I finished, what I'm working on, and a little bit of a knit along, I guess, that I'm hoping to have. So let's get into it. As you can see, I'm wearing my finished Ixchel sweater. I have no idea how to say that. Everyone keeps telling me how to do it, and I just say it however it comes to my mouth at the time. But it's this beautiful full body colorwork sweater. It's by Catherine Clark of the Brooklyn General Store. It was in the 26th issue of Pom Pom magazine, and it has these lunar phases across the top and then just stars all across it. And I did it in Brooklyn Tweed Loft in the cast iron color, and also their new pumice color. I actually didn't realize I was using one of their 3 new colors until after I had already purchased it. I thought it was because I think I have a lot of sweatshirt, which is that sort of dark gray, and they have one that's lighter, and this one's kind of an in-between color, and I thought it was perfect. It made this, it lowered the contrast, which for a sweater which was such a full-fledged color, a little bit more muted, but still have this sort of spectacular silvery but across a dark night sky look. And yeah, I thought for my aesthetic, if you could call it that, the original colors of the sort of turquoisey dark blue, very sort of semi-solid yarn with this gold would be a little bit too much, and I thought this one is a little bit more subtle, although I've been seeing a lot of people's versions with the original colors, and you honestly can't go wrong with the original. But I also didn't super want to do that much color work using a superwash yarn. Although it is a cashmere merino and it does fluff up a lot more, but I find that color work is still best with a woolen spun yarn, so like a very softly plied and what you would call rustic yarn. So unsuperwash treated. That is because once it's blocked, a lot of the spaces, because of the qualities of the wool, it fills in the spaces in between the stitches and makes it a little bit more coherent as a fabric. Whereas a superwash treated yarn, because basically on a wool, you have these little spikes which will catch each other, which is why when you wash it, it could felt and turn into one solid fabric, like the dollar store felt you can get. If you throw it in the wash, it just agitates it and it makes it kind of stick together. When you superwash treat it, it smooths down all of those spikes so that it can't adhere to each other, which is why it allows you to wash it in a machine or a little with it allows you to wash it in a machine. Why did I say that twice? Ooh, why am I out of breath? Okay, maybe I'm out of practice. So, because of this yarn being non-superwash treated and its ability to kind of, to that those spikes aren't, smoothed out, it kind of sticks to each other. And so it doesn't have the sort of spaces in between the fabric. I have to admit, I was very bad, and this is not actually blocked yet, so it would be a little smoother once I have sort of soaked it and then stretched it out to the proper dimensions. But I'm so excited to wear this that I just kind of skipped that step. I used just an iron and I steamed it. I didn't do it properly. You're supposed to put a cloth over it and just make sure that you're not burning the yarn. But I just kind of use the steam and kind of so that it's a little bit smoother. So it's smoother than it was when I was knitting with it, but it's still not 100%. And the good thing about loft is because it's woolen spun, there's a lot of air in between the fabric or in between the yarn. So when you're knitting it, it's a little bit tighter than it would be then when you wash it, and it sort of fluffs up. So that's what I really love about this yarn, is it kind of just fluffs up once you've washed it. I regret putting this on now because I wanted to flip it inside out to show you what the insides look like, but I'll put up a picture, I guess, next to me. I always hate it in editing when I say that because then I forget to go back and do it, so I apologize if I have, but I'll put up a picture here. Maybe if I say it twice, I'll remember to do it, of the insides, because what I've done, as you will notice, across this lunar part, it is black across the arms, and you divide for the arms after. And what you do for within the pattern is either you weave it across and then you knit just the moons, or you can cut it every row. And I decided instead of doing that, I would just carry the yarns across the arms because it's quite a large part without any colors. So what I've done is I followed Susan Rainey's technique, which is like a modified version of a ladder back jacquard. So I can't show you this without stripping, so I'm sure you'll see in the pictures. Maybe I'll do a close-up crop of the pictures or just a close-up of this. Put it here, Heidi. Don't forget. And basically it looks like ladders with a crochet chain across it. So they, yeah. And what that does is carry the yarn across without creating these long ladders where you can put your fingers through or get it snagged when you're putting it on. And I've tried that. I actually tried that technique on a shorter distance, like just to pull it back across, but it didn't work. So you kind of need it to be circular and going across the longer distance. And it does make a little bit of a bump, but it's basically invisible. There's a bump because there's an extra layer of fabric, but considering that you're carrying all the strands across, it just makes the, rather than having like an empty space without any strands across the back, it creates kind of a similar fabric all across with the extra layer behind. So it's very warm, and I have regretted wearing it to work when after my walk into the building and I'm like sweating, trying to pull off every layer of my scarves and my jacket, and this is still like against my skin, and I'm like, people are saying good morning, how are you, and I'm like, I'm good this is good, thank you. But yeah, it's quite warm, which is fantastic because here in Ottawa we do get as low as -40 or worse with the wind chill. So I love having 100% wool garments to kind of keep all the heat in. So that's my first finished objects, and now I'm just gonna pull this basket and show you the second thing that I finished. So this is the Eri Sweater. It's by, I think the pattern's by Isabel Kramer. I've talked about it before, but it's plain stockinette across the back, but it has the center textured panel with this faux cable. So this is not actually a cable. There are cables down the two sides and twisted stitches here, and this is a seat stitch. But this faux cable motif across the top is just magical in the way you create it, because it's just, I think you go top down. So it's just decreases and some pearls here and some yarn overs here to create the illusion of a large cable motif. And it actually makes it quite a much lighter fabric across the middle rather than like a thick cable would be. And I made this in Knit Picks City Tweed DK, which is a fairly affordable yarn you can find on the Knit Picks website, and I mention it now because they're having their biggest sale of the year. So if you're in the market for affordable but still natural fibers, that would be a place you can pick something like that up. Or if it's your first time working with natural fibers, it's kind of a low cost entry point compared to going for some of the more well-known brands such as Brooklyn Tweed, which would cost you a little bit more if you're just getting into knitting. Embarrassingly, I started this sweater back in June, and I actually finished all of it except for the arms, I think, in about 2 or 3 weeks. And then I just put it aside and did not finish it. All I had left was this collar. This is also not blocked, so it's a little bit wonky across the collar. I just had the collar left to be picked up and the 2 arms, and I just left it. Because I think someone was asking me this the other day, if I'm a product or process knitter, and I think I might be a process knitter, because as soon as I was finished the body, most of the challenging aspect of the sweater was done. We're creating this texture, so I was kind of not, I was fine without having finished the product to feel like I've used the pattern, if that makes sense. There are times like this sweater, where I just wanted the product. And so even though by the time I got to the arms, I really wanted to put it down, and I did put it down for a few days, I was reluctant to come and do the sleeves because I didn't want to do the intarsia of this part. But this, I was satisfied I had finished the textured part, which was the interesting bit, so I was not in a super big rush to do the sleeves. But I took it with me on my trip to Calgary, and I did one of the sleeves, basically the entire sleeve on the plain. I had only a couple inches left in just the ribbing, but then I noticed that the sleeve was like a kimono sleeve. It was ginormous by the time I got to the bottom. Basically, sometimes sleeve math doesn't really make sense, because while in terms of, I've noticed that in terms of sizing, Sleeves are usually the part where I have to kind of wing it a lot more, because I think arms are a lot more variable than torsos are. I mean, yes, there are very differently shaped torsos and things fit better or worse on people, but for a torso, most patterns are aiming for the bust. So if it fits your bust, it'll probably fit the rest, just better or worse. But in terms of sleeves, because you have to decrease down to a smaller circumference, I find that doing it proportionally, the way that designers do the math, really differs. And sometimes you can tell there's an assumption that you're kind of a sausage casing. So if you're a larger size, which I am, I usually do about, so my bust size is about 43, so I usually like at least a 4-inch ease, although because I don't gauge swatch that often, I kind of pick a larger size and then it kind of ends up being about exactly right. Because I'm doing the larger sizes, there's kind of an assumption that you'd be large all the way down to there, but I actually have very small hands. So my wrist is really small in proportion to my upper arms. So what I've noticed with a lot of patterns is that the decrease rate really doesn't work for my body, because I have very large upper arms all the way until my elbows, and then it rapidly decreases. But a lot of times patterns ask you to decrease immediately all the way down to the bottom, which is fine if you have a significant amount of ease up here, but if it's a tight fitting sleeve and you're immediately decreasing, then you have a tight arm, and then maybe it starts to fit around here. So in the case of this one, it accounts for this. It's a really smart pattern, but it didn't work for my body. Basically, it wants you to knit straight until you get to about here before starting the decreases. However, the armholes were enormous. So I had maybe a 4-inch ease here, and then I had to knit a few centimeters before starting to do the decrease. And so by the time I got here, it was basically out to here. And when I started doing the decreases, it was very, very slow rate. And then by the time I got to here, it had this much ease. And I prefer to have a little bit tighter armies so I could do stuff. So basically I went back and ignored the pattern, and basically I started to decrease right away. And I did it at the rate of basically every 5 rounds decrease 2. This is very different from the original pattern, so I don't think I'm giving away very much, but essentially I needed 40 stitches around here, and I had ended up with 60 by the time I had, when I had followed the original decrease pattern. Anywho, all of that to say, I did this whole sleeve and then it was ginormous, so then I started the other arm and tested the more rapid decrease rate, and it worked for this one, so I had to go back and rip it out and do the second arm. So I've knit these sleeves 3 times, but I finished it, and it is super cozy and soft. The city tweed, I think, is made from... Wait. Okay, ignore me tripping over the camera. My camera, confusingly, in the middle of that video, decided to take a picture of me, so I thought I'd lost the whole video. But it hasn't. So the last thing I was talking about, city tweed, very soft. Alpaca. I like alpaca, not the greatest for sweater, but in this case, because the alpaca content is so low, it just adds a little bit of softness to it, but it's still mainly merino, so it has that strength. The reason why I don't like alpaca in garments is because it has a lovely drape, which is fantastic for garments that you want to be drapey, such as a shawl. It has a tendency to lose its shape over time under its own weight. So I did learn the alpaca lesson on my Ixchel sweater. Picture here if I remember, because it's sort of just, yeah, it's very comfy, very cozy, very warm, but doesn't have a lot of shape anymore. It's still fine. I think I can still get another couple of months wear out of it, but I've learned to not use alpaca in garments unless it has a significant proportion where it's mostly wool, which will stabilize a little bit more. I don't really remember where I was going with this, but that's the finished object. I had restarted recording this because I thought I'd lost the whole video, but turns out I haven't. So now I'm trying to continue from where I was before. And the lighting is now getting dark. So what am I working on now? What I'm currently working on is these beautiful mittens. I had gotten the pattern for this as part of the Get Your Yarn Wish granted, and someone lovely, I don't remember their name, gifted me this pattern. So this is the right hand. I mentioned that my hands are very small, so the thumb is a little bit too big if I follow the original pattern, but it's too late, and I'm not gonna rip it back. So I'm doing the second one now, and I didn't buy any yarn for this. I'm using up my previous project yarn, so I used the rest of this cast iron and also some Fossil in Brooklyn Tweed Loft, and this is Hayloft, which I had left over from my, what's it called, Galloway cardigan. So that is very exciting, and because of how chilly it is, I'm really looking forward to having some mittens to wear. I'm gonna see if it's warm enough on their own after I block it and let all of the the yarn kind of expand and fill in all the gaps. If not, I did see a lovely pattern from one of the ladies who works at Espestrico for a mitten liner, and I'm thinking of doing a mitten liner in mohair to go underneath it, so I have 2 layers for the mittens, and that'll make maybe the thumb problem a little bit better. The other project that I'm currently working on is one that I'm test knitting a pattern for by the lovely, one of Christine, who's in my knitting group, told me how to say her name because I was saying Paul before, but it's actually Pole from Urso Yarn. And she's a wonderful local dyer, well, not local to me, but to Montreal, so local-ish because it's only about 2 hours away. She's coming out with this new design and a new yarn, which I'm testing both of. So this is called Étoile Ours. I am so sorry. My French is quite awful, but yeah, it's the bear constellation, and I've chosen this pink, white, and brown combination, which kind of reminds me of a Neapolitan. I can't say English words anymore. Neapolitan ice cream. I'm still a little bit hesitant on this color combination because it's quite out of my comfort zone. I usually like kind of cool colors, but this, I think it's growing on me. So this is done in her new yarn base, which is 80% Quebec Dorset wool and 20% nylon for added strength. And it's a chunky weight yarn, and I wouldn't say scratchy because I'm not very sensitive, but it is definitely on the rustic side, so if you're sensitive to that, it's a yarn that's coming out on December 1st, I believe. And so is this pattern to go with it. For the neck portion, I held a double with lichen and lace marsh mohair in the faded rose color, which I'll show you a skein of later for the knit along that I wanted to talk to you about. But yeah, it's gonna be a super cozy. It's like a Icelandic style Lopaesa sweater is how she describes it. But it's knitting up super quick. I did the color work section in about a day, and I've kind of picked at the stocking net because I am not always the best at doing plain stocking knit because I find it not as interesting, but I've picked at it and now I'm starting to, I'll be done soon. I'll be done by December 1st, definitely. Just have to do the sleeves immediately and I'll be done. But yeah, I think it really is starting to grow on me. I was really worried about this color combination before, but as long as I like it, you know. Okay, what else am I working on right now? Oh, I don't really remember the names of those colors. One of them is Cannel, one of them is Natural, one of them is Rose. Anyway, I will leave time here for me to tell you the colors as well as what the yarn is called, but it's Urso yarn. You'll be able to find more info on it on her website once the base is actually released, since it's not coming out until December 1st. So, what else do I gotta show you? Oh, I started this. This is called the Popcorn Sweater by A Nordic Knitting Tale. I'm hesitant to tell you that that's the name of the pattern because I'm actually not super impressed with this pattern. It might be the writing style. It's a Norwegian designer, I believe, and so from what I've heard from Ellie of Skandir Knits, for example, it's a lot more common to have to assume a lot of knowledge in terms of a knitting pattern, but in that case, I did not see why the cost of it, which is about $10, would be the same as, say, an Andrea Mowry pattern where she goes into great detail. But maybe that is to say Andrea Mowry should be charging more for her patterns, not that this should cost less. Because I definitely think that knitwear designers don't get paid enough for all of the work that they do. But I'm just a little bit frustrated that this particular pattern cost $10, which is actually more than what I often pay for sweaters. And in the end, it is just a basic raglan, but telling you to do the popcorn stitch or the bobble stitch every couple of rounds. So I don't really see the value for money, especially because there's no short rows on the back or anything. There is a similar pattern that's in Lane magazine called the Arbusto, which is a raglan with popcorn stitches all over. I keep saying popcorn, bobble stitches all over. Except that's reverse stocking knit, and I've heard good things about that. It tells you about how to place the bobble. So the reason I'm frustrated too is that it doesn't tell you how to place the where exactly to place the bobbles. It just says make sure that it's in the center of the previous. So I don't see why that's something that I needed a pattern for. I could have come up with that myself. And in fact, now I'm just kind of winging the pattern and not so much following the instructions. And yep. But it is very cute, beautiful outcomes. I've seen a lot of lovely finished objects with it, so I'm sure that some people do really love this pattern and enjoy it. I think it is a nice project. So I don't want to be completely like negative about it, but perhaps if you're a beginner and you don't have experience kind of figuring out patterns on your own, it's not really the best one for you to choose. And I would go more with the Lane magazine pattern where it kind of walks you through a lot more on how to actually do it. I think I'm losing the light a lot. Alexa, turn on Heidi's room. Okay, I hope the lighting isn't too bad because it's now artificial lighting. Sorry if that jarred you. Another another work in progress that I like to show you in my plastic bag is some yarn that I picked up during my trip to Calgary. So I picked it up from, start at a place that makes sense, Heidi. This is the piece of silver pattern. I don't remember who it's by. I'll put it on the screen. And it is being knit out of Ching fiber in the smoke color. So it's the Ching fiber merino silk base, and it's this beautiful blue with speckles through it. And it's this pattern. I'm just doing a very basic raglan with a turtleneck. That's kind of the special part about it. And it's likely going to be cropped so I can wear it over top of dresses. Yeah, there's not much to add about this. I am alternating skeins because for hand-dyed yarns, there is a chance that you get a significant variation in the yarn or in the color, even from the same dye lot, just because it's hand-dyed. And that's something that you kind of know going into it. So I am alternating skeins every single row by doing the helical knitting technique, which I'll put a link to a tutorial in the notes below from Babbles Traveling Yarn. Basically, you knit around, and instead of knitting to the beginning of the round and leaving a ladder up the back where you've alternated the skein, you kind of slip a few stitches and then start knitting again. Basically, it's like there's two rounds always catching up to each other but never quite getting there. It's a really good way of doing jogless stripes. Anyway, I'll put the link to the video because I don't think I'm explaining it particularly well, but it does make an invisible alternating rounds compared to if you just carried the yarn up one line, the same stitch. You kind of change where you're changing the yarn every single row, and it doesn't really, it means like you're not starting at the beginning of the round every time, but it makes it a little bit smoother of a transition, and I don't really see where I'm changing the yarns, and you avoid pooling and a large stripe across the bust, which is a common problem with hand-dyed yarns, at least knitting top down. But yeah, I think it's really beautiful, these colors. And I was excited to see this yarn at Pudding Yarn in Calgary because this is a dyer who's in the UK, and I love the colors that she comes out with. And I would have had to wait until March for Edinburgh Yarn Festival to see her. So maybe if I finish it, I can just pop up to her and say, look, I finished this in your yarn. Which is a really exciting part about going to festivals in person. The other thing that I started to do, as you will notice, as with this project and this, is I've started to do a lot more plain knitting because, not airplane knitting, but plain, simple, straightforward knitting, because a lot of this type of color work requires a lot of concentration, and the reason I had gone to Calgary was because of some stress-related issues that led to me having to take a step back and rethink life and balance and all of that. So my brain was quite unable to focus on more complex projects, partly why I had put this aside for the duration of the trip, but I finished it once I got back. So I wanted to do more straightforward, mindless knitting because I had a hard time concentrating on more complicated patterns. As a result, I've decided to do some sock knitting because it is a significant portion of just plain stocking knit stitch. This one I actually turned the heel in the middle, but I started with afterthought heels on the socks that I knit while I was in Calgary. I actually left them with my mom, so I'll put a picture of her wearing them because that pair ended up being a little bit too long for my foot. So I am doing the inverse colors. So I did the socks on my mom's pair with the blue as the cuffs and heels and toes, and I'm gonna do the yellow as the cuffs, heels, and toes on this pair. I did most of this. I haven't touched this since I came back to Ottawa 2 weeks ago, but I did all of this basically on the plane home. And I still, once I finish it, I will have to start the second pair, which has always been my problem with socks, is that I like to do things only once, and I don't like, so I never pick up the second thing, which is why sleeves are such a struggle for me. So that's the first pair of socks that I started. I do have another pair of socks, but I don't have it with me, but it's like a hot pink. So that will be pretty awesome. Ooh, another project housed in this lovely plastic bag is another Birds of a Feather. Now I'm not quite sure if I'm going to finish it, but I have picked up 2 skeins of lichen and lace single ply merino in pressed flower from Helical Handmade in Calgary, sorry for the rustling, as well as a skein of the same color in the marshmallow hair. I wanted to do a second Birds of a Feather shawl, but now I'm not too sure if I'm going to finish it, because I kind of wanted to use this color to perhaps do a Zweig sweater, and I don't want to use it all up, because this calls for 2 skeins of the single ply merino, although on my last Birds of a Feather I actually only ended up using 1 skein and like a row of the second. So I would have a whole skein left over to be able to do this bag, but this bag also calls for like a skein and a bit, so I also don't want to, because I kind of want that project more than I do another Birds of a Feather, I might end up frogging this project. But this is so beautiful. What I was thinking of holding with this or using with this is going to be the contrast center. And I was looking at Madeline Tosh's yarn, which has the hollow glitter. So there's like a lovely soft pink, like a mauve sort of color with a holographic stellina through it. I was thinking of doing that color with this. I think it would be a very low contrast, but anyway, it won't be for a while because Espace Tricot, which has the yarn, only has 3 of them, and I think I need 4 for my size. And I have so many projects ongoing that I'm not in a rush to figure out what to pair with this. But that was my idea when I bought this yarn, was to do a Zweig. And, or else I'll just finish this Birds of a Feather. But that's not really my super priority, because at this point I am more focused on finishing projects. Whenever it gets to sort of the end of the year, I always start thinking like, what can I finish by the end of the year, because I want to start the new year fresh. Obviously, I'm not going to finish the majority of the projects that I've started by the new year, but one can always hope. And I also want to start using up a lot of the yarns that I purchased a lot of previously. I mentioned on my Instagram that I don't really believe in the concept of a stash, but that doesn't mean I don't have one. I don't believe in the concept of a stash in the sense that I don't like buying yarn without knowing what's gonna happen with it. I don't really buy yarn and have it sit around, because that makes me sort of anxious, because I don't like having things that are just shelf queens, I guess. So I am always thinking like, what can I do with this to make it useful? So all of that to say, I purchased previously a lot of knit picks during my student days where I needed affordable yarns, but so I have a lot of knit picks yarns, which is nothing, not a negative thing about using using affordable yarn, but the fact is it was too affordable and I bought a lot of it, and as a result I have a lot of knit picks yarns that I have to now get through, and I don't necessarily know what to do with it all. So a few of them are sweater quantities, but I don't think I would be doing a sweater out of it. For example, the palette yarn, I did do a, what's it called? It's the Caitlin Hunter with the flowers across it. Anywho, I did a full sweater in it. I left it with my mom because I've noticed it pills a lot more than some of the yarn that I have begun to use. It's a little bit more higher quality. So, but I think it's still fantastic yarn. It's not that because it's cheap it's not good. I don't really agree with that, but I just have a ton of it and I don't know what to do with it. And because it's the end of the year, I always want to start the new year fresh. Now I'm thinking of how do I repurpose it to get the most use out of it. One of the things that I'm going to be doing, I think, with some of the Knit Pick sweater quantities is a lot of mittens, because some of the lighter weights, because it's a non-superwash yarn, would be really good for colorwork mittens. So I think that's what a lot of them are going to end up being. I'm also using up some Brooklyn Tweed Loft because I buy a lot of it for the current projects. That's my current favorite yarn to use, is Brooklyn Tweed Loft. So, but I have like little bits of leftovers that I'm trying to find purposes for it. And yeah, so I think mittens is one of the big things that I'm using my leftovers for. I think I'm losing steam, so I'm sorry that I've started to kind of talk nonsense because my camera cut me off. The last thing I wanted to tell you about is the garment lend along that we wanted to start on December 24th, Christmas Eve. And what I'm going to cast on is the rose cardigan, and I'm going to do it in a solid color with the marsh mohair and the rustic sport by Lichen and Lace. And my personal deadline is March 15th, which is the day I'm leaving for Edinburgh Yarn Festival. But I think we're just going to do a year-long knit-along from December 24th to December 24th of next year. So if you want to join us, I'm going to post a hashtag. We'll come up with one soon, and we'd be happy to have you. And I think I'm going to call it a day at that. My name is Heidi. Again, you can find me at Books and Cables on Instagram or Ravelry. And it's been super fun talking to you, and I wish you great success in all of your knitting projects. Okay, see you next time. Bye.